Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, and thank you, my friends, for being here and listening to this podcast. I know some of this isn't always the easiest thing to be listening to, because I oftentimes ask you to take a look at yourself. And I think those of you who are here and listening are truly committed to bringing more love into their lives. And you're so committed that you're willing to kind of inspect the places in yourself where you do have room to grow. And that takes courage. And I just want to celebrate you for that, because that is what it takes, and that is actually what brings more love into our lives and more love into the world. So, as I've said before, you all are my heroes. You are love warriors, and I'm honored to be here to support you in bringing more love into your life. Today, I am going to talk about how to invite in more of that love and connection that you might want, you probably want if you're listening to this podcast, and sort of lay out another one of the common backfiring tactics, as I call them, that we highly sensitive people can tend to slip into. If you missed last episode, I highly recommend you going back to episode 28 to listen. But I talked a little bit about what a backfiring tactic is, and I'll share that super briefly right now. A backfiring tactic is one of the communication or sort of behavior tactics or approaches many of us take. It's kind of like a misguided strategy to getting what we want more of in our relationships. So today I want to talk about one of those and actually address a way more effective approach that actually works. So today we're going to talk about complaint. This is really not very different from blame, which is what we talked about last week. Complaint, blame, criticism, they're all sort of intertwined. So some of what I share today can actually apply to the blame and criticism habits that we might have developed. But specifically, I'm going to be talking about complaint. So complaint is one of those things that we can slip into when, about different things in our lives. Like maybe our husband isn't, doing some of the chores around the house or doing some of the housework, or it's not getting done like what he agreed to do. He's not chipping in as much. So we might fall into kind of complaining about that, or we might complain about habits that he has that we don't like. Smoking or eating. I've been known to complain to my husband about his, he really loves Reese's peanut butter cups. Doesn't eat them all the time, but sometimes we'll go through these phases. And I think most importantly, and this is what I really want to talk about, we might find ourselves slipping into complaint around how our partner shows his love for us, or how he doesn't connect to us or do the things we want him to in terms of like how affectionate he is, right? Like we might complain about his lack of loving us in the way that we like to be loved. Right? I hear this a lot. Like he doesn't say I love you a lot, or he doesn't give me words of affection, right? Or he doesn't touch me affectionately, or he doesn't buy me flowers, right? Or, go all out on my birthday. All of these things that we think will help us to feel loved, which is what, one of the biggest things we want in our marriages, right? So I'm going to focus on this, how we use complaint as sort of a backfiring tactic to try to get more of that sense of connection and feeling loved in our marriage. And next week, I'll share some more specifics, like actual communication, like actual words you can say in communication strategies you can use to address this, but as well as to help you address maybe how he's not helping around the house as much, right? Some of those more like logistical life things. So you can look to next episode for those specific strategies. Today, I'm going to give you a much more generalized, like important foundational way to approach getting more closeness, getting more connection, instead of using these backfiring tactics of complaint. Now, I, once again, was very good at using complaint in an attempt, a totally unconscious attempt to create more connection in my marriage. Early in my relationship, I'm sure I did this plenty in my first marriage, but it was like a carryover habit that I found myself back in the early days and years with my husband. Complaint tended to come out of me most often around getting the closeness and love I wanted, right? Like getting that juicy connection with him. Particularly when he wasn't like automatically doing things in a way that made it easy for me to feel super cared for, right? So when I wasn't feeling connected, or when I was feeling like he wasn't like showing up in the way that made it easy for me to feel loved and close to him, what would happen is I'd start complaining. Like my voice might get a little whiny when I wanted to do something with him, or I would kind of accuse him a little bit of like not paying enough attention to me or spending too much time working. Like it might have sounded something like this: why are you always working? Like, you're going to work again tonight? Why? Like, don't you want to spend time with me? Or even like, you work too much. What about the rest of your life? Right? That kind of thing. So from working with my clients, I know that this can be fairly common for us HSPs, right? I hear from so many women who so badly want to feel really loved by their partner, but they aren't speaking about or asking for the specifics of what they want, right? Rather, they are feeling kind of blamey or complainy inside, kind of mad and hurt that he isn't sort of just naturally doing the things or saying the words that lead them to feeling loved and connected, right? Their focus can so often be on what's wrong, what's not going the way they want, instead of their focus being on what they actually want. And when I say they, I'm speaking about my own self in the past too. And in fact, sometimes I can still slip into this, right? It's a very human brain thing, as I keep talking about. Our brain loves to go to focus on what's missing and what's wrong, right? But when we communicate from that place, from that focus of what's going wrong, when we complain about what's missing, how our partner isn't loving us the way we want to be loved, how he isn't showing up how we want him to show up, how he's doing this or that wrong, what actually happens is it leads us further from the love and connection that we want, right? This is why I call it a backfiring tactic, right? So complaint and other negatively focused or negatively kind of like imbued or infused approaches to communication, they just really don't work so well. And I think I talked more at length about that last week. If you want to go back and listen to that, please do so. It's really good to understand. But these approaches are harsh, right? They're kind of hard. The energy behind them is kind of hard and negative and maybe even a little fearful. And what happens is when we speak to the negative, right? When we speak from this place of focusing on the negative, what we tend to do is inspire a negative reaction, right? Complaint simply doesn't invite a positive response. It's a speaking to what we don't want instead of what we do want. It focuses on what we don't want, so it often therefore invites more of what we don't want, ironically, right? Instead of inviting the closeness and love that we want. Complaint really like repels and inspires, like in our partner, like almost a rebellion or a hardening from his end, right? Or defensiveness, right? It's often met with defensiveness or shut down. Complaint just obviously doesn't inspire like a warm, loving response, right? So that's why I call this a backfiring tactic. So here's the thing. When I was able to see this in myself, when I recognized this, it allowed me to make a total change. I saw it wasn't working. It wasn't getting me the results I wanted. And so I decided, all right, let me shift this, right? And then I was able to learn to communicate in a so much more effective way and actually get way more of the connection, closeness I want, right? And I maintain that to this day, right? It's lovely. So if you are getting a defensive response from your partner sometimes, or just like like a little bit of like this hardening towards you, or a shutdown that happens when you speak to him about things you don't like that are going on, I want you to check in with yourself honestly. Are you using blame or complaint or kind of leading with the negative in your communications? Do you tend to speak to what you don't want instead of what you do want? So many of us do. So not a reason to get mad at yourself, right? If you find that the answer is, oh yeah, actually I do tend to speak to what I don't want instead of what I do want, that's not a problem, right? No worries at all. What I want to encourage you to do is actually to celebrate yourself for being willing to be so honest with yourself, for being willing to see that and admit that to yourself, right? And then just decide right now to learn a way that works better, which I'm going to offer you right now. So here is the solution. Here is the first step that I want to invite you to try out. As you're shifting into dropping the complaint habit and communicating in a way that works better. All right. First, if you found that you do complain, I want you to really recognize that it's just simply a backwards way of trying to get what you want, right? Complaint always comes from wanting things to be better, right? And so really it's coming from this really benevolent intention, right? The intention is to have more love, to feel more love in your marriage, right? What could be more benevolent than that, right? It's a beautiful thing. It's, wanting that love is such a beautiful and essential thing for your health and well-being, for his health and well-being, for your family's health and well-being, for the world's health and well-being, right? So, a connected, loving marriage is really one of the single biggest predictors of overall life happiness. And so wanting that and trying to create that in your life is never something to condemn or judge yourself harshly for, right? Even if you're not doing it in the most skillful way, right? The intention is good, and I want you to really remember that and know that. So you're like 100% not bad for falling prey to this tactic. And again, just as another reminder, it's just very natural for our human brains to focus on the negative. And because we haven't been taught, because our society hasn't taught us how to not let our lizard brain or our negativity bias run the show, it's just very human. So have compassion, forgive yourself for not being perfect, and know that the intention is a benevolent one. All right. So the next step after seeing that is to simply turn your attention to uncovering what it is you really want, right? Because complaint is coming from looking at what we don't want, such as, why are you always working, right? Obviously, in that situation, I wasn't wanting him to work. I was wanting him to spend some time with me. But I was focusing on what he wasn't doing right. right? So uncovering what we really want can take just a little bit of listening to ourselves, right? And of course, as an HSP, that's a strength you have. You're innately good, naturally pretty aware of what your heart is asking of you, what you want, in other words, right? So use that to your advantage and just simply ask yourself, if you notice you're falling into complaint, or if you have the urge to complain, ask yourself, what do I really want here? What am I actually longing for in this situation? And then once you've answered that question for yourself, I think so often it's going to be for us, I'm wanting to feel connected. I'm wanting to feel close. I'm wanting to spend time. I'm wanting to feel loved. I'm wanting to love him, right? So once you figure that out, this is step 3, be willing to share that with him. Be willing to speak to what you want. And in this case, it's going to mean letting your longing be seen, letting your desire be seen, be made visible. And yes, this can feel vulnerable. And this is why we don't so naturally go this route of speaking to what we want, right? It feels uncomfortable to reveal our tender desires, right? Our deepest longings, even if they're just a simple thing like wanting to connect. That can feel like standing naked in front of our partner, right? Like it's like our heart is naked, right? And some part of us is deeply scared of that. Like it's just like wired into our DNA. It's a very human thing to be afraid of being revealed and raw and exposed like that, right? Because our partner might laugh at us. He could scoff. He could reject, right? That's why we complain instead, or why we use any of the backfiring, sort of negatively focused communication tactics. Because these tactics hide our soft spots behind this like hardness, right? They're like protective coverings. So it's super easy to slip into, complaint and blame because it can feel safer than revealing our desire. We speak to the negative by default because it's less vulnerable than speaking to what we do really want, right? Again, complaining is a way of protecting our soft hearts behind like a hard front. Right? Complaining acts like a wall that we can hide our tenderness, our soft, tender underbelly, like the truth of what we really want behind, right? So we are not exposed, so we are not rejected. But that wall, it does what a wall does. It divides, it disconnects. It cuts you off from your partner, right? That wall you create by using these tactics, it really creates a false sense of protection. It doesn't truly protect you. It actually keeps you from what you want, especially in a marriage, right? Because it gets you further from the safe, loving environment that you want your marriage to be. These tactics kind of turn our marriage into like a me against them thing, right? Which feels like separation, which feels remarkably like rejection. So like hiding from rejection like this often leads us right into feeling rejected, or at least not loved in the way we want to be. So rather than vulnerability being a problem, it's actually the solution. Vulnerability is actually like the magic that melts those walls away. You don't need that wall. You don't want that wall. Let's melt it away so that you can feel connected. So I like to call this, it's like speaking to what you want, stating what you want is like kind of going belly up or exposing your heart, right? It's showing your soft, tender undersides, your soft parts. It's just verbalizing your longing, your desire, the thing that you want, right? So it might sound something like this, like, hey, I miss you. Hey, I'd love to spend the evening together. Hey, I'd love a hug right now. Or I want to feel close to you. I can feel how different that feels, right? Then how come you're always working? Totally different energy. Totally different place inside you that this communication is coming from. And it's going to have a totally different effect, a totally different result. So in the next episode, I'm going to share some more specific, like I said earlier, like this, some very specific communication tactics for making requests and speaking to what you want. But for now, I just wanted to give you those examples of like sort of to illustrate how it could sound. But I want you to find your own most natural way to express your desire, right? With no trace of complaint. The words ultimately don't matter so much. It's the energy behind them, right? This willingness to show your heart in this kind of naked way, right? That is not the words themselves, but that willingness to show your heart. That's what has the power to create the connection and the intimacy you long for, right? As scary as it may be, right? Because it is that act of sharing what's real for you, what you really want, that allows him to actually see you, to see your heart, to see your humanness, to feel your longing to be loved, your desire to connect with him, right? And he's likely to feel loved when you do that. He's will feel your love for him this way. And the truth is, most partners feel wonderful when they can see what their partner really wants and actually sort of please their partner in that way, right? Especially when it's being communicated in such a respectful way, such a sweet, open, loving way, right? So sharing from your longing, right? Speaking to what you want can be a gift for him as well as to yourself. So my invitation is to truly risk your partner seeing that longing, right? More likely than not, he will find it endearing, like even sexy and captivating, right? That is the power of vulnerability. And he's much more likely to be inspired to show up more fully and even more effortlessly return that kind of tenderness to you. Again, this is a form of leading love, as I've talked a lot about. You're inviting the kind of openness and connection and tenderness that you want from him. When I first started doing this, yes, of course, it was a little bit more scary, right? But I was so encouraged by the results I got. One time early on when I made this shift, my husband, he wasn't my husband then, but he told me something along the lines of, it's so great when you share that with me. Because sometimes I just get caught up in other things and I forget how important it is for me to connect with you like that. So thank you for reminding me of what really matters. Pretty sweet. And whether or not your husband articulates something like that in response, he's likely to feel that way because you do really matter to him. Your marriage does really matter to him. And you help him remember that and feel that and see that when you are willing to be vulnerable. So I like thinking that your success rate in getting a loving response and feeling connected and heard and seen and loved by your husband goes up in direct proportion to how vulnerable you are willing to be about your desire to connect, about what you want to experience with him. Right? And yes, being willing to be so vulnerable, it requires courage, right? Because exposing yourself like this is innately, opening yourself up to the possibility of rejection. of the possibility of him saying, I don't want to do that. Or of exposing yourself to the feeling of him not actually loving you. Even though in truth, it's going to help you know even more deeply that he loves you and feel closer to him, right? But this part of us that's afraid, right? It's totally normal. And it just means we need to kind of muster up the courage, right? To be courageous enough to be vulnerable so we can reap the rewards of amazing intimacy, connection, closeness that we want, right? And mustering up this courage can really require us to not be averse to negative emotion, to, in other words, be kind of more comfortable with feeling negative emotion, and to be able to manage your mind and really supervise that lizard brain of yours so it's not creating unnecessary negative emotion for you where there doesn't need to be any, right? And it requires you to really know how to love and care for yourself through any hard emotions, to know how to always have your own back and how to guide yourself back to feeling comforted and safe. Really, this all requires developing an innate, super solid sense of emotional safety, of safety inside of your own self. And that's when courage just comes naturally, and vulnerability won't be scary or hard. And therefore, connection and closeness with your partner will be so much more accessible, so much more easy to bring into your life. So I've been speaking to all of these things that are required for being vulnerable in this podcast, in different episodes. All sorts of little ways to help build that into your system, right? And I'll continue to share about this ongoingly into the future. And all of this that I just mentioned, that's what we develop deeply and thoroughly when clients come coach with me. So if you know you could use some help around being vulnerable and communicating effectively and feeling really safe in yourself and, being able to handle your emotions super well so that you can show up in your marriage to create the connection and love and closeness that you really want there, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Signing up for a consult call is always the first step. You can simply email me at hannah@lifeisworthloving.com or go to the schedule your consult link in the show notes. And for now, enjoy exploring speaking to what you want, stating your desires, and letting yourself feel vulnerable and watching how magically that brings in way more closeness and connection into your marriage. Have fun with this and be oh so well. Until next time.